Hey everyone, it's good to see you again. So, this week there's been a lot of talk about something you might have heard mentioned before, the Insurrection Act. President Trump recently said he's considering using it, and that's got a lot of people wondering what exactly that means.
For a reason. If I had to enact it, I'd do that. If people were being killed.
It's one of those old, rarely talked about laws that suddenly feels very real again. And here's the surprising part. It's been around since the early 1800s and gives the president the power to use the military on U.S. soil. Most people don't realize how much authority that actually represents or how it's been used in the past. So, what would it mean today if the president really went through with it? Before we get started, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the military should ever be used within the United States for handling unrest or protests? Leave your thoughts below. I'll be reading through them. And if you find this kind of breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's start with the basics. The Insurrection Act goes all the way back to 1807, signed by President Thomas Jefferson. It's been changed a few times since then, but its main purpose has stayed the same. It gives the president the power to send in the U.S. military, including active duty troops, to deal with what's called an insurrection or domestic rebellion. Normally, the Posse Comitatus Act prevents the military from acting like police within the U.S., but the Insurrection Act is one of the few exceptions. In simple terms, it's a legal loophole that lets the president use the military at home when things are considered to be out of control. And here's the thing, it's not used often. In over 200 years, it's been invoked only around 30 times. The last big example was in 1992 during the Los Angeles riots after the Rodney King verdict. Back then, the governor of California actually asked for federal help, and President George H.W. Bush approved it to restore order. Before that, Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy both used it in the 1950s and 60s to enforce civil rights laws, especially when states resisted school desegregation. So, when it has been used, it's usually been tied to major civil rights issues or serious breakdowns of local control. But now, President Trump is saying he might use it in cities like Portland or Chicago, places that have seen protests and sometimes confrontations, but not anything officially declared an insurrection. During a recent press conference, he said, "We have an Insurrection Act for a reason. If I had to enact it, I would." Later on, in a TV interview, he said the situation in Portland was pure insurrection. That's strong language, and it's where a lot of the debate starts. What counts as an insurrection, and who decides? See, under the law, there are three main ways a president can use the Insurrection Act. The first is if a state asks for help to stop a rebellion. The second is if the president decides that local authorities can't enforce the law or are obstructing it. And the third is if people's constitutional rights are being denied and the government needs to step in. In each case, it gives the president a lot of freedom to decide when those conditions are met. It literally says the president can act when he considers it necessary, meaning it's based on his judgment, not automatic rules. That's why legal experts are debating this so heavily right now. Some say Trump could technically invoke it if he argues that violence or lawlessness makes normal law enforcement impracticable. Others say the facts just don't support it. For example, in Portland, reports show that homicides are actually down 51% from last year, and protests have mostly been peaceful. There have been clashes, sure, but no large-scale rebellion. A federal judge even called the administration's justification false claims of violence, saying the country runs on constitutional law, not martial law. So if that's the case, what's really happening here? Well, some governors like Illinois' J.B. Pritzker say the administration is trying to create a sense of crisis, to make peaceful protests look like chaos, and then use that as a reason for more control. Others argue that this is about restoring order when local governments refuse to act. Supporters see it as decisive leadership, while critics see it as dangerous overreach. And that's the tension, power versus restraint. And you know what's interesting though? The Insurrection Act is vague on purpose. When it was written, the founders didn't imagine today's world, cities, social media, organized protests. They just wanted a way to handle actual rebellion. Because of that, modern presidents have to interpret it in real time. That's why every time it's mentioned, it creates controversy. It's like dusting off an old tool that wasn't built for today's problems. Now, if Trump really were to invoke it, what would that look like? Well, he could order the military or federalize the National Guard, even if the state doesn't want it. Troops could be stationed in cities to enforce order, protect property, or disperse protests. It would give the federal government control over local enforcement, at least temporarily. And even though it sounds extreme, it would technically be legal, as long as courts don't step in to block it. And that's where things get tricky. Courts usually try not to interfere in executive power, especially on national security. But they do have limits. In fact, a recent ruling from the Ninth Circuit said the president's use of military forces has to be grounded in factual necessity, not just opinion. So even if Trump invoked the act, it could end up in a legal fight, something that might delay or limit what he can actually do. And this raises another question. Could it set a new precedent? Think about it. If a president can call protests insurrection and use the military in response, that could reshape how the government handles dissent in the future. What's considered too far today could become normal later. That's why both legal experts and politicians are watching closely, because this moment might influence how power gets used for decades. Also, it's worth noting that public opinion plays a big role here. If the country sees military action on its own streets, reactions will be strong. Some people will feel safer, others will feel threatened. And that divide could deepen political polarization. We've seen it before. Moments meant to restore order sometimes end up inflaming tensions instead. The 1960s civil rights interventions were legally justified, but they also sparked intense resistance in the South. The same pattern could happen again, just under different circumstances. Now, let's talk about why this matters to you. It's not just about politics, it's about what kind of authority we think presidents should have inside the country. Most people agree that when things get dangerous, government should step in. But who decides what's dangerous enough? And what happens if that power gets used for political reasons, not safety? That's the real concern people have. At the same time, supporters of Trump's idea argue that local leaders in some cities have failed to control crime and property damage, so federal help is needed. They point to rising frustration among business owners and residents who feel unsafe. It's not just about politics to them, it's about restoring stability. So, there's a very real divide between those who see it as protection and those who see it as overreach. And here's something that might surprise you. Every president technically has this power, not just Trump, and so would any future president. That's why how this situation is handled matters so much. Once that line is crossed, it's hard to go back. Another thing to consider is that invoking the Insurrection Act doesn't automatically solve the problem it's meant to fix. Military deployment can stop immediate unrest, but it doesn't address the causes. Things like inequality, frustration, or mistrust. Sometimes when you use force to calm things down, you just push the tension below the surface. It looks peaceful, but it's not resolved. So then what's next? Right now, the Justice Department is reviewing the legal grounds for any potential use of the act, while states like Oregon and Illinois are challenging the federal deployment of troops. Courts will likely decide how far the president's powers can go. But in the meantime, this debate is shaping the public's view of power and protest in America. Hey, I want to know what you think. Should a president have the power to use the military in situations like this? Or should that always stay with local leaders and governors? Let me know down below. I really like reading your takes on these kind of questions because it gives a sense of how people across the country are feeling right now. And yeah, until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.